Welcome to Pure Signal, where we cut through the noise to bring you what matters in business and technology. I'm Vincent Yates, the data and AI guy. Joining me is Jason Goth, our CTO and systems architect thinker, and Kevin Erickson, our CEO and business strategist. Today, we want to talk about CEOs and CIOs and their seemingly love-hate relationship. CEOs across the board are firing many CIOs, not for blowing the budget like they often have, but for moving too slow on AI. Why is this happening? What's at stake? And who is going to survive this next round of executive accountability?
Should we arm wrestle?
That sounds like an AI written intro.
That was, of course, AI written because we're all in on AI. Don't you worry about it.
Yeah. AI is not going to lose.
AI is the only winner in this game. That's right. I mean, look, from our own experience, we've seen many companies wrestling with and now actually taking action on this exact concept. In fact, we have some friends in a major healthcare system here in Texas that the CEO is desperate to make AI movement as quickly as possible and bring it to life in his organization. The CIO was hesitant, frankly. Looking around the organization, leaned on his CISO, who says, what Jason CISOs always say, no, don't do that. That's too much risk. And ended up siding with the CISO. Well, sounds dramatic, but now he's gone. It is really what we're seeing across the board. We see this with even large organizations. We even see this at the CEO seat now with WPP letting go of their CEO. He'll be resigning, or he did resign. He'll be leaving at the end of the year. And I think you're really seeing the pressure from the board infiltrate the entire organization. In fact, the CEO had just gone through a huge leadership change a couple years ago, 2 summers ago, let go of 5 or 6 of his top lieutenants in an effort to go faster with technology and lean more into that space, and it didn't work. Now he's gone. And so I think we're seeing this across the board. And Cannes, of course, happening this week as we record, is buzzing. I mean, every company, every agency is now talking about how generative AI is going to change the game and how are they going to be more AI ready than their other brethren agencies. So here's the point. Only 25% of enterprise AI projects are hitting their ROI goals today. That's not a stat that's all that new. We've seen things like this. 80% of projects historically fail in this space, but it's the first time we've seen it with Gen AI because the first wave of Gen AI projects, if you recall, were actually very positive, Bradley. We're now seeing these things consistently not meet the bar. So boards, CEOs, they're all in a panic mode. And AI isn't just tech, as we always talk about, Jason, right? It's really going to be the essence of what differentiates the winners and losers in this next revolution. So the old rule of keep it safe, move slow, not going to work. It's going to be the fastest, and you're going to have to break some stuff along the way. Silicon Valley, the whole way through. Are CIOs being held to an impossible standard? I mean, this technology is new. They're expecting results immediately. And if only 1 in 4 AI projects, broadly speaking, are successful, is this tech a failure? Are CIOs holding the bag? Or are they just not acting in the right way? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think it's probably somewhat the straw that broke the camel's back. And you think if you go all the way back to, probably the mid-2000s, it was always, let's get more agile, let's get more lean, build, measure, learn. We've got to go faster, faster, faster. A lot of the different agile, methodologies, let's be more product driven. Let's do continuous delivery, CI/CD and DevOps and all of these things. That's been a almost 2-decade long drive to get the technology organization moving faster, right? And to really compete with some of the digital natives. And I think this is probably the straw that, AI being like, even an accelerant to that, like now we have something to help us finally make this transition and we can't even adopt that. I mean, you say it's, new, but when did ChatGPT 3.5 launch, right? Kind of kicked off a lot of the hype almost 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. And in 2 years, people are not able to, adopt and use it for value. And so to me, that's really where this is. It's just the, enough is enough. We've got to move faster.
Yeah, I think that's very reasonable. And I guess Kevin, to that point, how much of this from your perspective is really a performance problem versus just the boardrooms buying into the hype, if you will? This is really, are CEOs actually clear about what success with AI really looks like? Or are they just trying to have retail therapy and say, we do AI?
Yeah, it's an interesting tee up, right? I mean, we know that we're biased a bit, but I think CIOs, are expendable. And so I think, one of the things is, my first question would be a couple different thoughts, and I'll get to your specific tee up, but one of the questions, if I look at objectively, is the CIO that was successful over the last 5 years, are they the right CIO that's going to be successful for the next 5 years? I think that's probably progressive companies are looking at that question, thinking about that. If you think about what's been on the agenda for the last 10 years of a CIO, everything from cloud to this to all these different components. Well, now it's probably a bit more of a rise of more of a CTO type, someone who's more around what we're building, working through that, less around control, how that plays out. So it's possible that you need to have that, your way you describe the CIO, a more innovative CIO seems to be where we need to go. So there's probably some that may or may not fit that category. Though when I go to your specific question around, hey, is the board the CEO? I don't know if they know what they need, but they're probably trying to give themselves a little bit of time. I mean, if you think about the broader economy, lots of uncertainty, obviously a very interesting time around the world right now. I'm not saying that CEOs are firing their team just to give them a little bit more runway, but there's probably a bit of that, or the fact that there's been, even we see this some of our clients, right? This shift from I need some AI, I want some AI, to now what do I do with AI? My suspicion there's probably some boards and some C-suite type executives that are concerned, like, well, where does it fit? What do I need to do? Am I getting this vision from my executives? And so it's probably a little bit of that. I think that stock prices are kind of, it's a hard time right now, so you have to have elements to work through that. You've seen such a boom in the technology stocks for the last 24 months, and obviously that's cooled off, and I'm sure companies are trying to figure out where they work through that. But it is intriguing around what is going to be, your more downturn type strategies, your efficiency plays, your accelerations, how you work through that. I am curious in this tension between the CIO and the CISO. They both have their roles to play, but you can't be too risk adverse. But you're kind of a bit. This is where I think the CIO, every 2 years the CIO gets fired. I think why it fits that is because you're kind of damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. If you don't have all the controls in place, you're going too slow, going too fast. Well, then that's reckless, and you get a data breach. You got to do something there. And the flip side of that, you're going too slow. You're locked everything down. Well, then you get fired because you're not innovating fast enough. So I don't know what the right answers are, but my suspicion is the CIOs are probably more progressive than the CEOs, but they're an easier target.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And I think we know historically that fortune favors the bold. And this is one of those moments when I think it really will. You have to be bold in this moment in time. The flip of that, to your point, is that you really can't do that without a strategy. And hope is not a strategy. Just going to Microsoft and buying the Copilot and be like, well, this is going to solve my problems, will not work. So you really have to re-examine, what is my corporate strategy in light of generative AI? I think that falls to the CEO and the board to do that with great input from their directs. But then you actually have to execute that thing. And my guess is that CIOs, to your point, the ones that are most large enterprises, aren't really all that innovative. They are probably a bit risk adverse. And for many of them, especially large organizations, that's really the pinnacle of their career, and they have everything to lose and very little to gain. And so my guess is you probably will have to go through this sort of revolution, this changeover at the top, to get people in there who are looking to make a name for him or herself, looking to do something different. And the ones who bring this bent will have a much better chance of landing that job, is my guess. But I think this is it's a difficult spot from my vantage point. I mean, CEOs basically want miracles because they haven't invested in this technology. They haven't invested in the foundations that we always talk about, the massive amount of tech debt, the huge amount of data silos across their org. And yet they want it to happen all right now. So I want you to figure out all of the tech debt for the past 10 years I haven't invested in or paid for. I want you to fix it, and then I want you to leverage the AI to give me net new outcomes. That's a difficult spot for many of these people. I think that there will have to be a reckoning at the CEO level to some degree too.
I think one thing before we move on, I think it's interesting too, just you think about the cost of technology talent, right? You just came out the last 5 years and just, That's the one area of the business where talent became more scarce. We know that many of our technology companies, let alone technology departments, have back to the office working through that. So you had this group of individuals that had, as a positional technologist, a lot of people power over the last 5 years, and it's shifting going back. I think AI is both going to create, again, tremendous opportunity for certain types of employees, but it's also going to have a lot of negative impact for other type of technology employees that maybe are more in the run state type scenarios. And so I think it's a really fascinating time. You talk about the CIO and the relationship with the CISO. I think the CIO relationship with the people side of the organization too is going to be really interesting. And how do you sit there and how do you really attract, grow, develop the right type of talent that can then filter this all the way through the rest of the business. And CIOs, again, there's a lot of stereotypes around CIOs, but CIOs that have been around vendor management and around platform and stability and those things, it's quite possible it's a different skill set today, which is really around they're asking, how do we go and really change how we do our business from a technology and data-driven perspective, process-driven perspective, and that's different than saying managing your vendors and your appropriately so.
Yeah, I think it's a great call out. Go, Jason.
Yeah, I think there's a good analogy here. If you think about, let's take a trucking company, or a medical supply company. We worked with, a few of those where their legacy processes were all around, someone literally faxing, orders to a call center, and someone working on the mainframe and dispatching, printing things off and faxing them back. And what did the mobile phone do? It cut out that entire thing, right? So it's like, well, I don't need truck drivers to call and get orders faxed to them. I just need, a system where on their mobile phone, they can go look at them all and select the next one. So it's not so much a migration of the legacy tech. It's a rethinking of how the business goes. Well, I think AI offers that too. I mean, with so much focus around the AI conversation, it's all around productivity, which is like, how do we just do the same things faster? Right? How do we deliver software faster? How do we have fewer people in operations, or get this done, this thing written faster? And I'm not saying those productivity things aren't valuable, and they are, and they should be gone after. But if you think about that overall strategy, it's only one half, right? It's like, yeah, we can do these things faster, but what should we do entirely differently, baking AI into the product itself? And the challenge is, if you don't fix some of those foundations, you can't do any of that, right? And so you got to really accelerate fixing those foundations. Now, the good news is AI can help you do that, right? And once you accelerate that, you can really start to do these new things, and then really start seeing the value that drives, like the mobile app for the trucking company. But that's kind of the second phase, and people are just having trouble getting the first thing done.
Yeah, and I think that we should dig into that. It's a really interesting point here, that most companies are quietly struggling. They're struggling with data silos. They're struggling with legacy technology. Some are still on-prem, frankly. I mean, poor organizations who are in that spot. And then you have to attract this incredibly skilled talent that's very rare at the moment, just because it's so new, not because it won't be learned and won't scale, but because it's so new. Those people have a lot of choices. And if you're somebody who has those skills and you're confronted with two different job opportunities, one that's sort of a digital native forward-leaning tech company, and one legacy company that's still on-prem and using, I don't know, like some kind of virtual machine that you have to log into on your Windows machine, like which one are you going to choose? Pretty obvious what people have historically chosen. That's what really drove Silicon Valley's adoption of Macs on everybody's desk. It was a huge sort of just signaling for those organizations broadly. So I guess even in tech forward organizations, the infrastructure and talent are going to be massive, massive bottlenecks. How do you go about solving that, Jason? How do CIOs drive meaningful AI results when they're faced and confronting with the underlying systems and people, to your point?
Well, I think you've got to set meaningful goals in very short times, right? So you have to have a vision, but there's a great book called How Big Things Get Done by, I won't even try to pronounce his name. It's like Danish or Norwegian or some Scandinavian company. It's got a lot of
A lot of consonants all next together.
Starts with an F. Friedberg or something. But,
Okay.
how big things get done, and he has this model in there of think slow but act fast, right? Like think through, like what are all the things we have to get done, and like break those down into repeatable, chunks. But then you have to execute them fast. And I think what we've kind of evolved into now is more the opposite of that, which is think fast and act slow. We want to go do this. Okay, great. Now let's go start a project and get budget and gather requirements from hundreds of people and go through, weeks or months or sometimes years of architectural review and feedback, and we start developing and we manually test everything. And so, the projects that are still run like that, they go 2-3 years. Well, 2-3 years, like what was happening 2 or 3 years ago?
Yeah.
Like COVID, there was no AI. So it's a project that takes 2 years might as well not even be started.
Yeah.
You have to like deliver something. Like here's where we're going, the vision. But we have to deliver a meaningful increment, a meaningful step towards that vision every 1 to 3 months, I would say. That was actually the real, people kind of forget, that was actually the real original impetus for the agile and lean movements back in the 90s. I think that movement has kind of become a caricature of itself. It's over processed, and there's too much process and certifications, and this is we have to write things this way, and we have to have these program increments that we can't change. That seems ridiculous. You can't change things in an agile methodology, but people wanted it to look and feel like things that were familiar. They didn't want to change the org. They didn't want to change the way they delivered. They didn't want to have to rewrite all the software. And so, they force the agile methodologies into, conforming, right, and so what you have today is, not agile. And so, but that was the original intent, was let's actually deliver something valuable out to the end consumer every, month or so. And I think you've got to do that. You've got to break up your transformation so that you deliver a meaningful step, not just, to keep people excited, to keep progress going, reduce cost delay, all those agile things. But you have to know that prove that it's working, and you have to hold that bar for your employees to show this is what's expected. We're not going to go slower than this.
Yeah.
I think what's kind of intriguing about the moment too, and going back to maybe the board CEO to C-suite type responsibilities, is that you've got right now, if you're thinking about a board or CEO, what are you hearing about AI? Well, you're hearing, this company's only hiring AI. They're getting rid of all their developers, or they're doing all these different things. And so the press is either we're talking about some type of conflict in the world, or we're talking about these type of things. So then you go back and you're the CIO and you're trying to implement this in, you're trying to get adoption, you're trying to get change. Maybe you've got some tools you've rolled out, but you're not reducing your whole tech team. You're not, all these different things, but that's what's showing up on the Wall Street for the weekend, and the CEOs sitting at the beach reading there, and they're getting pressure for costs and everything else. And so it's a little bit of an interesting scenario, maybe even a little bit as an executive team, how do you make sure going up and down, whether you be C-suite, CEO, board, you're sharing what are the objectives, what are you trying to do, what's success, a little bit of just really trying to work through that. Where again, if you go back the past 5 years or really 10 years, I think success was kind of known from a technical perspective, right? Cloud to this, to survive COVID to this. And now we're in a spot where I think it's a chance for technology to shine again in a way where it's going to radically change business like it did with, again, cloud, mobile, internet. And you either have executives that are ready for that. Again, it's got to be on a CEO agenda, whether or not they're prepared to do that or not. It's easy to kind of lash out. So a really good buying market, if you're a CIO that's got proven track record of doing this in your business, you're going to have lots of job opportunities. But it is a bit of an interesting element of what is real, what is hype, what is going fast enough, and what is an excuse, because I think that's the other thing that's kind of interesting. First time in a bit where earnings are a little bit muddled, and And so you have to have a way to differentiate yourself. And so it's a way, changing your team is a long tried true strategy of like giving yourself a little bit longer to stay in your role by blaming someone else.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think this is the core challenge that I think CEOs are probably wrestling with, and maybe you are too personally, in your capacity here, which is really like, given the tech debt that's occurred across organizations, given the talent, labor supply that you currently have, and to your point, where you want to slowly evolve that, should CEOs slow down or should they double down? Like, what's the risk of pushing too hard versus the trade-off of not pushing hard enough at this moment in time? How do you find that balance?
Yeah. Well, I think in general, as a CEO, you should always push hard. What's a scenario that you're just okay to steady state? You probably work for the government, maybe financial service industry or something like that. But I think what it's interesting to me, even Jason, you and I have been playing this a little bit, right? Where it's like, what are you trying? I want my role, measurable things that we're going to get done and when we're going to get done. And I want to have the ability to understand what those are. And it seems like a really simple quest for me. But I also know, being on the other side of that, being in client service for 30 years, is that it's not always easy to do that. You got to build some skills, and you have to be able to work through that. And so I think we're going to be the partnership between CEO and board and executive team. I think is, again, the more you can have some measurable things. I think one thing that's interesting, we've been talking about this before, but the shift from the last 2 years, you talk about 3.5 launch of like, what is it? I got to get some to what I need to do. We are definitely seeing now where more focused projects with specific outcomes, use case, driven outcomes. And I think some organizations are probably able to communicate that, prioritize that. Others are not. If I were just to assess where we're at, I think our awareness is at an all-time high. But now it's going back to a bit more focus. I'd rather get fewer things done and get them done and work through that. But it's a little bit of a challenge. I can see I don't feel this necessarily for us internally, but I can definitely get the sense of where, you got executives that are asking, well, where's it coming? And you're getting a lot of blank stares back. And so I would encourage our listeners and folks that are different roles is like, the more we can quantify what you want to do, and this is where I actually think it gets into agile too, Jason. This is more your world than mine, but the more we show those consistent approaches, because the fun's just beginning. Like, we're still talking about just pure and simple efficiencies, primarily user-driven efficiencies. We're not even getting into a world yet where we're getting a ton of the agentic stuff, how it's going to start changing, knocking out roles. I mean, that's going to come. I think the other one that is a really simple, and we've talked about this internally, is that have you changed how you interview? And I think you can imagine a CEO asking a CIO, have you changed how you interview for AI? And when the answer comes back, I don't know, you can imagine how that response sounds. Yeah. And I imagine that's how a lot of people probably are still answering.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think, there's a lot going on in the space. They haven't paid down that debt. There's, just like our federal government at the moment, a lot of our income is going to just pay down the interest on the debt that we've accrued. And that's true across technology as well. I don't think it's reasonable, to your point, Jason, to imagine a world where we're going to have a 3 to 5 year strategy written by McKinsey and built out like Microsoft used to do waterfall, that at the end of this thing, we'll have all of our stuff solved. It's a disaster. It always has been. At the same time, I don't think that you can afford to not invest and get real outcomes quickly. And so I think our advice typically, and what we've seen to work pretty well, is the think strategically and act tactically approach. That is to say, have a North Star that you're moving to as an organization. Make sure it's holistic and encompasses most, if not all, of the things you want to do eventually. And then build it out piece by piece. Only pull over the data from the silos you need to unlock the first use case. Just do that in a way into a platform that will scale across not the first or the second, but across all end use cases you have. So each incremental use case becomes cheaper and faster, but you're showing progress along the entire journey. And so I think, that really is the approach we've seen. And yet many organizations kind of end up doing one or the other. They end up in POC purgatory because they do everything all at once, or they make no progress because they're too busy thinking and pontificating of what the right answer should be. And so in the midst of all of this, we're seeing a new risk fundamentally in my mind, which is playing it safe is actually the riskiest move of all. And these risk-adverse leaders are therefore at the highest likelihood of being replaced by those who are really big and AI-leaning or AI-first kinds of folks. even if the roadmap isn't clear, they're doing something actionable and tangible to measure the results. And to your point, agentic's going to make that even more so the case this year. I suspect you'll see little pockets of it really popping up that show that. And so the companies and the leaders who are experimenting with that, learning and iterating the fastest are the ones who are making real progress and ultimately, I suspect, win. And so, Jason, I'm curious from your standpoint then, how do you balance that with the compliance, with the security, with the regulatory pressures that you might have? Is it possible for all that to exist with AI? Can you still innovate, or do you see a split where some companies will be the AI winners and the losers based purely on risk tolerance?
No, I think that's completely a false choice that that people are giving. Oh, do we want to innovate or do we want to be secure? I think if you design things well and you use AI and other traditional automation tools, you actually can be more secure, moving faster. An example of that is one of the challenges of security has always been like, how do we test it, right? Like how do we test all of the different things that people can do? Because by definition, a breach is going to attack some vector you didn't think of and build a solution for, right? Well, the tools can go test for that, right? There are lots of tools. They can also generate more secure code, right? When you use them for code generation, they can include tests for all the OWASP top 10. They can make sure that we, cover that. And it's around having like the right platform with that stuff already built in. You can go much, much faster, right? And it's no different than, when we just automating functional. What happens when you automate functional tests? Things go much faster. What happens when you automate deployment? Things go much faster and with fewer issues. If we take an AI kind of centric approach to some of the security, compliance, and other things, we'll go faster and be more secure and compliant.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense to me. And I think that, you can even iterate faster. So once you discover a vulnerability, you can patch it faster and cheaper than you could before, right? I think these are all definite possibilities. So as you kind of solve the paradox in the reverse way, which is actually, it makes you not more vulnerable. It actually makes you more secure, to your point. That's really fascinating.
That was always a lot of the findings that, if you go back to some of the CI/CD movement, that was always the counterintuitive findings of all the data. Nicole Forsgren and Dora and Accelerated, all those books and all of that research showed that, like, well, if we automate these things, we move faster and get better quality and get lower cost. The old iron triangle. She had a great talk one time. She did where she said, pick all three, and you can do that. That's what these do. And I think the tools allow you to not only you can do that automation much faster and better by using AI, as well as incorporate it into, those tools to perhaps try to break things in a way, new and novel ways. And again, I think it's about building the right platform for product teams with that stuff built in, which again, it doesn't take long. You don't have to go build it all from, before anyone starts getting value. You can start incrementally adopting it. And people have done that. We've seen really accelerated, not to use that term, but accelerated outcomes. It's just a matter of going and do it. And there is a leap of faith, I guess, that, by doing this, that those solutions will be faster and more secure and higher quality. But I would just say, look at the data. Go get the book Accelerate and just look at the data. It is true, although it may seem counterintuitive.
That's great.
I think what's interesting, I think we've shifted, and I don't know if there's like what makes me feel this way, but this idea of like the last couple of years was like, hey, AI, caution. And you've got the right governance between your CISOs, your auditors, your lawyers, those things like that. And I think that there was probably prudence for that. Well, now I think you need to have leaders that are, to your point before, Vincent, that are bold. And my guess is that boards, shareholders, clients will probably be more forgiving if you are a little sloppy potentially on some of the the data security governance things, but you were moving forward and you could show demonstrated value in terms of velocity, acceleration, pick your different metrics, versus you remain cautious. I think there's, so I don't know what's the subtle shift in society that allows that window, but it is going to be intriguing of what is, you think about, again, go back to the last 10 years, we've spent all this time and energy on security and privacy and all these different laws and all these different things that are all just getting blended together in this new AI driven world that makes it different. And, I think, again, putting myself in a CEO hat, I think if you were to get let go because you were too aggressive on AI or because there was some sloppiness that led to bad outcomes, my suspicion is you will find yourself that you will get another job fast, versus the alternative if you get let go because you were not moving fast enough. And so it's going to be curious on what is governance on that, and particularly in a world where, so, I've said this before, like, there is no real security, and so I don't believe you can try to be as wise as you possibly can, but this idea that you're going to have it be perfectly secure and work through that's going to be it's just not possible. So.
Well, I would point out, like, who do you think is more secure? Like the tech companies that incorporate AI into everything they do, like Google or Amazon, or, random company with, 300 people on their security governance board. Right. Like I would bet if we went and hired some white hat hackers, they'd get into that company a lot faster than they'd get into Google.
Sure.
And why is that? Right. Well, because when you adopt the tools, they help you suss out those problems, but also as you find them, you can change them faster.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got more modern solutions that, are easier to adjust for those things.
Yeah, the economics of writing test coverage just changed dramatically, fundamentally, in a way that gives you the ability to just write simple tests more robustly than you've ever done before.
Well, let's take the OWASP top 10, right? So for those that aren't familiar, it's like the top 10 most frequent security breaches, right? So not checking input for, SQL injection attacks, not having assault for cross-site scripting error, vulnerabilities, those type of things. Well, when you use the tools, they will generate that entirely, and people just don't do it because they don't know how, or they don't think of it, or it's not in the requirements, or it's a shortcut they take because, well, I don't have time and I've got my deadline, and that's going to be a whole bunch of tests and code that no one sees anything different from the end user interface. They won't necessarily know. Well, now if the tools generate the code and they are a large portion of the code, and that's built in for free, right?
Exactly.
Does that make your systems more or less secure?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Just by following the practices we already know. It's not like you're suggesting the AI will magically make up entirely novel attack vectors. I mean, it can, and academics use it in that context, but it's not even needed for a huge improvement. You could just follow the best practices that we all know we should do, and yet don't oftentimes, just because.
And have tests for them to validate that they work.
That's right.
That's the other, I get a lot of pushback on from some CIOs and customers where they're always like, well, how do we know that if we use it to build systems, and I say write code, but it could be tests, infrastructure, lots of different ways you could use it, synthetic data for tests and all these things. And people say, well, how do we know it will write good code or build good systems? And my response to that is always, well, how do you know people will? And the answer is they probably don't either.
Right.
And the way we do that is we test software. And so if it passes, all of these tests, we would have launched it. So if an AI writes it and it passes all those tests, why wouldn't you launch it?
Yeah.
Right. And so, and again, it probably has fewer vulnerabilities, and we can increase the test rate. So again, it goes back to your whole question that started this conversation was like, how do we make sure that we follow all the compliance rules and take standard of care and innovate? I think the answer is, like, by using the tools, you get both faster.
It's interesting. It's possible it's like listening to this and thought about this completely, but I was curious that if just the expectation of really the CIO agenda is now the CEO agenda more so than it has been, and maybe it could be even a generation if you go all the way back to kind of the initial internet, and so therefore it's just a different skill set and more aligned. Whereas I think the CIO had kind of that role had gone down the stack of importance, I think, as C-suites over the last half generation. So it's possible that that's why you're seeing some of these departures is that they don't have a business operator who's in that role. It's more of a business manager, and we need a more visionary. And it's possible that the CIO, even for us, when I look at our buyers, maybe our buyers are going to be more CEO, COO, really with a lot of the same strategies that we had been going to CIO with, because it's going to be so radically change how the companies do their just operate, and which can be a really exciting time. You think about it. If maybe this again initial element is really around how do we get great efficiencies through tools, changing how a company runs, organizes, thinking through that. Probably a bit more internally focused over the next couple of years, but then how that eventually will revert back to where companies always go back to, which is what's their customer and how that plays into it, which I think would be kind of fun. And it'd be fun for, obviously, our business. We'll have a lot of fun working through that. But I think companies should have fun doing that too, because one thing advantage of when you enter a season of really working on yourself, you actually have more control to do that than you're trying to do it only externally. And so, so actually, as many things, I find the optimism in the moment, but I think it's actually kind of interesting around how you'd position yourself towards that. And I generally believe executives are much more successful if you're always thinking about the outcomes in mind, and this idea of, we have some that we work with where the primary job of the executive is to manage, and I think that it'd be great if actually that's the primary job of executive is to execute, and that's a big difference. So
yeah, no doubt. And I guess
can I add one thing to my previous statement though? I think I did what I said not to do earlier, which was focusing on all of these internal efficiencies. Versus now we have those internal efficiencies. We can deliver fast. Let's integrate AI into the product. Now that there are some valid concerns around making sure we have the right guardrails, that the AI isn't making things up, that are providing bad information to customers, getting the price wrong, suggesting the hotel has a pool when it doesn't have a pool. There is some concern around that, and I think rightly so. But what I would say is being able to iterate fast and test at scale is the way to solve those problems. And so again, you need to focus on that, I think, first, and modernize, break down those silos and be able to iterate fast.
Yeah, that's fair. Going back to your point, Kevin, on the leadership, if AI really becomes the competitive advantage in the long-term moat for organizations, this next evolution of business, do CEOs, companies need to be contemplating a new role, like a chief AI officer, or does the traditional CIO evolve in your mind to cover these things too, whether it be the individual there in this current generation or bringing somebody in with that mindset? What are your thoughts on that?
I got what I think society will do and what I would do, probably slightly different in this case, where I think we tend to create new roles. I mean, we see this across lots of different sectors. So I think the wanting to do that, and again, I can say, well, look what I did. I hired this, I put this position, new team, everything else. I actually think, though, the more successful companies will just integrate that in what they do. They're going to find executives that are natively doing that. They're going to change their existing team. At some point, there's just too many additional roles. I mean, I think you've lived this out a little bit in your career. What exactly is a chief data officer, chief data scientist? What does that play out? Those are all, every organization has slightly difference, but there's obviously, there needs to be a spot to where you have clarity in what your team does. But this is a case where I probably would anchor more to changing the expectations of my existing team. It's interesting around innovation. You get internal innovation first, while then enabling external growth of your business. I think you're going to see much more. It's possible, as you saw an emergence of, just thinking about the last 20 years. You got a lot of CEOs today of big companies that came up through technology-driven roles and functions, whether even if they were in sales or marketing, they were still using a lot of the initial technologies of the last 20 years. It's quite possible you'll see that again, where maybe this will be a rise of younger CEOs, kind of more digitally native, more AI-driven, faster. Even going back through how many of the CEOs today really grew up through the whole, agile-driven elements of that. So it's could just be kind of a fun time. And the companies, again, that continue to evaluate how they organize and what they do are the ones that I think are going to be more successful. The more that you have innovation be, the same idea. Why do I think chief innovation officers have kind of struggled a little bit is because, well, when you have a function that's only about innovating, well, everyone should be innovating, right? I mean, everyone should be trying to grow. And so you can have support to make that a reality. Again, you can have a chief AI officer that's more subordinate, whose job it is to help make sure. But I think we tend to add a lot of bureaucracy, and I hope that AI I would love to have this kind of streamlining. I think the more your executive is hands-on on what they're doing, we've talked about this even internally, the more your CEO is driving the agenda versus being reported up to what the agenda is, the more likely a company is going to get there faster.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And we're seeing, most of the biggest AI wins aren't being broadcast from the rooftops these days. It's quiet. It's internal. They're well defended. I don't quite know why that is at this moment in time, but we do know that boardrooms don't love that. We know boardrooms, and in fact our own board in some sense is really big on the PR. They want the headlines. They want the awards. They want the proof points of what are you really doing with AI? And I think the natural consequence of that is that many companies are rethinking their leadership to this point. They're firing their CIOs because they didn't get enough press, even if they're making progress. I think by and large, most of them aren't making progress, and that's really the issue. But I think that'll continue to be an issue for those who even are. Are you doing it in a public enough way? Some people are splitting up the AI and the IT, and marketing is getting in the mix too. There's this opportunity to really consolidate shadow IT and sort of IT adjacent if you think about AI into one central org, and so there's this new power dynamic emerging. And Jason, we've debated and talked about this for 2 years now, maybe longer, around is there a chief AI officer? Is it needed? Does the CIO have that responsibility? Is the AI responsible for IT in general? How does that really play out is the question we've debated many, many times on this show. But I guess my question is, we've have several organizations, you've worked on many clients now who have seen real results using AI to drive both bottom line efficiency and top line growth, actually, to the tune of, 9 figures almost at one company in particular. So what new org structures are actually driving results? Is there a new org structure, or where are the CIOs leading and where are they being replaced?
I don't think that it's org so much as, what Kevin mentioned earlier around just having leaders being responsible for execution, right? In that, as people have come in, in some of the examples you mentioned, it was new leadership that came in who was like, hey, we're not going to just focus on the reports and read out our reports. Yeah, this project's on progress. This project's all the there's no report that drives me crazier than all the projects are in green, right? Like I'm doing a good job, because all the reports are green. Well, what if they're all the wrong thing that you're doing? And when was that schedule set? Right? 2 years ago. And is that even still a valid problem? I mean, those are, I think, managing to that red, yellow, green, it's kind of a crazy thing. But if people get in and, we've had leaders come in and really be focused on delivery and on execution and where is this? I want it, done out to customers next month. And how do we go do that? Well, what you have to do in the org, I'm not saying there are not org changes that need to take place, right? Especially around how things are budgeted and, kind of how some of the communication paths are reworked or dependencies are reworked in the company. But that tends to be very dependent on the problem. Hey, for this thing, Greg Athis, who's one of our partners in Chicago, he coined the phrase fracture plane, or at least it's the first time I heard it, is if you think you have these individual, functional groups like finance and development and testing, and can we fracture, just create a thin silo to go solve this problem? And whatever that problem is, right? Or however that problem is defined will kind of change what that fracture plane looks like. But those seem to have worked well into like just getting things moving, and then slowly you iterate through that and iterate your way into a new org. Like again, go get McKinsey to do a year-long study, and then provide us a new org that then we go implement over another year as people fight for who's going to get the biggest fiefdom. Like that, I think is not a useful exercise. So like anything else, you need to be quick to think through, but quick to act, and quick to adjust. And so I think those are the characteristics of, there's no org that works right, but those are the characteristics. But it really gets back to the leaders valuing delivery over, some report that says these 5 projects are red and these 2 are green.
That makes a lot of sense. And I guess, Kevin, to you, if you're a CEO at this moment under pressure from your board, what do you do? Do you find the new kind of CIO? Do you invest in some chief AI officer? Do you go for something more radical in an org design? How do you think about that?
Yeah. I mean, part of it, you have to know where your team is. As I was suggesting, we shouldn't have those roles. And then I was remembering your book and your chapter that told me I should. But I mean, I think every organization is going to be slightly
Vincent
different.
wrote that chapter.
Yeah, obviously self-serving chapter.
I kept deleting it, and he kept hitting undo, and I kept
Luckily
deleting.
there was
undo.
version control, and I kept putting it right back in.
Yeah, I think obviously it depends on each organization. I think you have to have those functions. And so I think part of the role of CEO is to say, and again, we all have our own biases. So I have my own too, right? Bias towards action, bias towards, where you're bringing this in, how you're doing through that, thinking through growth. And so, I would say an organization, you need to know what's best. If you've got really entrenched, departments, then maybe, you bring something in that sits on top. If you've got good collaboration, well, then maybe you change the role of your executives. But I would be right now, if I was I'd be advising my leads to say, this is kind of even what we're doing a little bit here internally, is every single area of our business needs to change. And so I'd be holding your leads accountable to that change. And if they don't know what they're doing or don't know how to do it, you can help them. You could find someone else to put this, executives and boards joke all the time, right? Hiring McKinsey gives you an extra year to work through whatever you're going to work through. I don't think at this point there's the time for that. And so, I think it'd be, again, the traits are pretty straightforward. People that are curious, people that want to work through it. It's possible the people that have these traits are going to find organizations where they can thrive in that. Different times, you have executives that have the political traits and some of that stuff that becomes really important. I would say right now, I would anchor towards action and less towards folks that can play the game. Again, every organization's different and what that plays out, but there is seasonal arcs that people take on. I think right now this is an arc for action, and I would hope that boards will hold their executives accountable towards that. It is interesting, though. It doesn't all have to be about customer acquisition or profitability. There's a lot of different places where you can play. I do think the moat's an interesting concept, though, too, both in terms of everything from your tech, your IP, your clients, to your talent. Like, there's a lot of different moats you can potentially have and how that plays out. And then I think ultimately it's going to be interesting on really what's going to be, where does M&A fit into this? Will large companies will buy firms that are there, and then, as you've seen in future or previous generations of M&A trying to buy technology adoption, how will that work? Where will that actually have the ability to take those learnings of probably the more smaller, more agile company to be able to inject that into a larger? There's always the risk of tissue rejection on that, but I do think they're going to have to see things try. And it also might be an interesting time that you'll start to see a rise of companies again, right? I mean, I think the whole, I think the West Coast has been a little quiet. The kind of the Silicon and New York tech corridors have been a little quiet recently. I wonder if they'll start to see this an emergence back into mainstream technology and the way that you saw again a generation ago of how the rise of kind of the tech and the mobile, those elements really infused ways for us doing business different. I think AI has a chance to do that and then more. So how that plays out. So again, fun time to be here, but I can tell you, banking on what you've done in the last 10 years, hoping that, hey, at least our stuff is safe. Like that's not going to work. And I also a little bit of a ramble here, but yeah, you had 20 years of stable interest rates and all these other things that were not rational, right? I mean, you can go back to 2008 and you got less geopolitical security than we probably ever had in a generation. And so, so it's a lot of different things going on that are going to require fortune goes to the bold. And I think the executives need to do that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And it's really just the tip of the iceberg from my standpoint. I think the churn at the top is real. It will continue to persist, I believe. And it's only a tiny fraction of what's actually happening behind the scenes. We have lots of clients we're working with right now around these exact issues. Like, how are we going to do this? Who in our team needs to stay in? Who do we need to replace quickly? Because we can't persist at this exact state. And so with that in mind, I want to do one last round of questions for both of you. If you were to name one AI win that you've seen at one of our clients, and they're not talking about it, but they should, without revealing the client, obviously, what is the thing you've seen that people really should be talking about and shouting from the rooftops?
Yeah. I mean, I might be more general. I think you've got a couple different areas where you've seen it with our clients. You have a couple areas where you've seen general. So one is obviously in executive reporting, dashboarding is one. Kind of how you run your business, what you think about that, your access to data. That is something. The speed of product launch, and that's another one that we're seeing. I think it's going to be interesting and really around the evolution of workforce. I'm intrigued by, this is a little less our company, but and our clients, but I'm intrigued by the technology companies and really the technology driven advertising companies that are talking about radically different ways of doing work, what their talent is expected to do, what they're supposed to know, how that ties into it. We've talked about some more of the gig economy stuff, but the 1-2 person band companies that are kind of way out punting their coverage based on different things. And so, those themes are going to show up in bigger companies. And I think they're probably happening in certain ones more, differently than we anticipate. I was with a friend this weekend who's got some really interesting that's going on with Microsoft and, just changing the way from, kind of the whole, agentic factory type approach and how that plays into that, it'd be interesting to see what is either cost savings or redeployment of headcount. But I think anything that's a manually or paper process intensive process is going to continue to get destroyed. And I think that your companies that are already doing that are not advertising that, but you're seeing it in their earnings or their redirection. That's the one thing that I would advise clients, and frankly, our company is, get those savings, harvest them, and invest that back into the R&D associated with how you do that. So you may not be seeing a lot of actual wins yet on balance sheets because they're redeploying the money back into the R&D, which would be really fun because I think it's been, again, a half generation to a generation where you've really seen companies do that type of investment.
Yeah, maybe I thought of one. Maybe it'll just reinforce my earlier point about the choice between innovation and compliance being a false choice. Is we have a client who is subject to a lot of regulatory scrutiny, and they were able to pass that and get through that regulatory process in like 70%, over 70% less time. And so I think this just shows that, and again, they may not want to talk about that as a strategic, because it's a strategic, thing for them, and they don't want to give other people the idea. So I won't even mention the more details of the industry, but I will say that's an example of how you can, have your cake and eat it too.
Well, it was a fun conversation last week. We were with a bunch of lawyers and we were talking just about
a fun conversation with a bunch of lawyers.
It was in this.
Sorry, Adam.
Oh no, it was when Adam was one of the people that was in it. But one of the context is really around. I think that one of the non-lawyers, what gets so frustrating is that you have these tomes of BS language, and there's like 5 things out of this 100-page document that you really want to get to, and it's like, and again, I'll say sorry, Adam, like lawyers exist to have lawyers have jobs, and I'm like, but if you're actually able to get quickly through, hey, most of this boilerplate can be done fast through automation, and we can actually get to where we need lawyers, which is to negotiate the 4 or 5 really salient points. And if we can get to that discussion much faster and like kind of get through this BS preamble of like back and forth, like that would be an example to me where I absolutely want lawyers in my life, but I want them focusing on the stuff that matters and not, figuring out is the address written correctly. And so I think that's an intriguing area to where are those other areas like that we have great domain expertise that's really needed, but they really focus on what's important versus what I think is a lot of just, pomp and circumstances. So
Yeah, I think that's great. The one I'd share is we have one client where the CEO is literally driving his exec team meetings off of actual data. So he has a little chat bot effectively in front of a dashboard, which is connected to a bunch of real data that we've sort of curated to some degree, but not too much, not like a cube. So you can ask novel questions. And I think when you get to a place where your CEO is actually being data-driven, is a huge unlock for that organization. That's my core belief. It's happened with Satya back at Microsoft when I was there. So I spent a lot of years toiling at trying to get Microsoft to be more data-driven. In fact, that was effectively my job, was to get them to be data-driven and collect data and use it to make decisions. Lots of campaigns around that, spent many years of my life doing it. And then Satya showed up and he wanted it. And all of a sudden across the entire org, every direct report he had was suddenly interested in this thing I had been telling them about for, at that point, years. And it really transformed how they all thought. There were insights that came out that nobody was really paying attention to before. There were decisions that were prioritized in a novel way. It wasn't just the good old boy network and I owe you a favor. It was really like, what kind of impact will you have? And we're going to measure it and hold you accountable, which really sharpened the thinking. And I think that was, at least in part, maybe not entirely, but at least in part of what really transformed that stock from this sort of stalling at 30-something a share to now being, what it is today at hundreds of dollars a share. I mean, that was a huge transformation.
So you're saying that the CEO is asking its little executive dashboard chat bot, which one of my directs is doing good? And it always comes back to CIO is not doing well.
Something like that.
The AI is being constrained by the CIO and the CISO.
That's exactly
so it always comes back up.
It's
the other thing I learned about that is it really is all about University of Chicago.
That's all true.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it's also about.
Yeah. That's exactly right. Well, thank you guys for the time today. I appreciate it. I think this is a real challenge for a lot of companies. And if you're a CEO, a CIO struggling with this, know that your struggle, you're not alone. This is happening across lots of our clients and lots who are not our client. We're seeing in the news too as well. And it is a tough spot to be in, but it's also, to your point, a really exciting one. And those who do this well will end up in the HBR case studies of the next generation, because it will be that kind of differentiation, I think, long term. So if you have more questions or want to reach out, visit the insights page at curdera.com. Thanks for listening.